So thank you all for coming, those of you who are here. It's always tough on the second day after lunch, but we'll make it up to you. I think we have a great panel and a great topic with a lot of different perspectives. I'll let the panelists self-introduce themselves in a moment here, but just so to set the context is about experience data and how we can better use experience data, both if you're running an OTT service or if you're a service provider to running an OTT service, which we use the term an ecosystem provider to publishers. But there's obviously we had a talk earlier today, and I used the example of when I was growing up and I was watching TV with my dad, and things would get fuzzy on the screen. He would stand up and he'd walk over the TV and he'd start hitting the side of the TV and twisting the rabbit ears, and and he'd change the channel regardless of how much I liked the content or not, if it really bugged him, right? And then when I became a father and my son was growing up, we had cable TV and we never got off the couch. We could change channels and it was a consistent quality of experience. And content was really king again to a certain extent. And now my son's off to college, and when he comes and visits me, I get off the couch and I'm resetting routers and throwing Apple TVs around and trying to figure out why things are buffering or not. And so we've sort of come full circle of where experience is really important again as it relates to running a content business or being an infrastructure provider around content. And that's really what this panel's about. It's about experience and how we can, as a whole, as an ecosystem, better manage experience. And then in a greater context, obviously data is a buzzword and everybody talks about collecting data. But in general, we also want to just talk in this panel about how can we use data to make actionable decisions in our business? How do we take data from being just metrics we collect into actions or business intelligence that can help us run better services or even potentially inform better content decisions and platform or application decisions. So we'll hopefully touch on a lot of that, but that sort of sets the stage for what we want to talk about today. So I'll let, going from right to left here, start with Perry. Let everybody introduce themselves, please.
Perry Weinstein, work with Excedo. We're front-end app development, been around for quite some time, helping our customers transform their video businesses from broadcasters, networks, and operators. And during this time, since 2004, we've built over 400 services on 45 plus devices. So we're coming at this from the front end, but more than just developing these services, it's about what happens after we stand them up. And so in that regard, we're very focused on how do we build the business versus just develop an app, and data plays a big part in that.
Great, thanks, Perry.
I'm John Mantell from CBS, and I work in the digital entertainment group. My focus is primarily our CBS All Access over-the-top subscription service. And as the product lead for that service, I'm really focused on what the experience is of consumers using that service and consuming our content. I think like Ed was saying, we try to set a standard for what the experience is that we're providing. Being a television broadcast company, our expectation and the expectation of people within the company and probably our subscribers as well is that it works just like TV. You turn it on and the experience, the quality of the signal is consistent. It works well. It always works, and that's not always the case with internet technology. And so we invest a lot of time and effort in making sure that's the case. And in looking at quality of experience metrics, we're just always really trying to understand what is that experience that our users and our subscribers are having.
Awesome, thanks. Darren.
Hi, Darren Lepke. I work for Verizon Digital Media Services. So VDMS is a small-ish group of about 1,000 people within Verizon, and in fact, we're now a part of the AOL organization. We provide business-to-business services for broadcasters like John, other OTT providers, from the point of ingest for your video, so wherever you're capturing or creating your video, all the way through the apps that Perry's company builds so beautifully. So our notion of quality is, of course, focused on the end consumer, but as a end-to-end service provider, we have a few more stakeholders in the mix, right? We do care about consumers, but moving upstream from that, we also have to worry about our customers like John and some of his other ecosystem partners like advertisers to expand the notion of quality beyond just the consumer experience, but also the kind of the upstream causes for that quality. So our view of data and quality kind of spans that entire workflow, if you will.
Great, thank you. So I obviously have some questions I'm going to be asking the panel, but please, those of you out there, if something strikes your fancy in the moment, please don't hesitate to call out, and let's keep the conversation interactive and engaging. Even if you want, you can move closer. We feel really lonely up here.
We got the big room.
Exactly. Just in general, sort of a softball question, help us understand, how is your organization today using experience data, and maybe even as a follow-on, how do you wish you could be using experience data?
Well, we're coming at this from a completely different direction. In fact, for this panel, I'm going to kind of change the paradigm a little bit. I know QoE is defined really more at the video level, traditionally. We look at not only how can we take data and enable action, but within the video experience itself, but also everything that surrounds the video experience. So as an app development partner, we want to make sure that our customers have maximum flexibility so that data is actionable. And that's kind of where we're coming from. So opposed from simply collecting data and what kind of data, it's more about how do we enable data to be actionable within an app environment, which traditionally is set in stone. So we've found ways to incorporate flexibility so that that's possible, and it's not just a static app that can't be iterative.
Yeah, we'll touch on that more a little bit later. So, John, data.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at data overall, we use it for so many different things, from just the overall health of our business to how users are engaging with our content, and just trying to understand what the journey is that people are going through when they use our products. When I started working in this space with a focus specifically on video a number of years ago, one of the things that we realized was we didn't have a really clear view of what was going on in maybe what I think we sort of define more as like the typical quality of experience metrics. And we would get calls and people would say, hey, your video's not working, player's not loading, or whatever things would pop up. And we realized that it was a big problem just not having that view into what's going on and what actual users are seeing. So now we've come a long way from that, and we use a bunch of different tools, things like Conviva that give us a nice snapshot into various metrics that tell us what the level of experiences that people are having, if it's consistent across the board, if people in different regions are having different experiences than people in other regions, or if we're having issues with some mechanism of our delivery, and generally, peace of mind for us that things are just going well and that we're providing a good experience to users.
Darren, any other thoughts on that?
I'd say, probably more than anybody at this table, our VDMS is awash in data from all aspects of our operations. So we use it in a couple different ways. Obviously, to reduce buffering to provide quality video experiences, but we also, in some ways, use it to guide our investment in our own platform. So, for instance, we have a content delivery network. We have 90 points of presence around the world. We're collecting, millions, if not billions, of requests for data every single day. And how the patterns of that come in, the data, times of day, different types of content, different kinds of customers. We use that to, identify points in our network where we could invest additionally. Our video workflow goes from ingest to encode and playback, so we get a pretty comprehensive view of how video is coming into the system. That data helps us shape the traffic within our network to achieve quality live stream. So if we're streaming from a college lacrosse game in North Carolina, we have to be aware of not only how it's being played out to consumers through the app, but also how that data is coming into our system, how the feed gets to us, and ensuring that we get the high quality signal. And then if you think about downstream into even like the ad insertion world, where our mechanisms in our platform are helping advertisers and ad tech platforms decide which ad to serve at what time. We see things like ad completion rates. How does this particular ad match up with this particular customer profile? How does this ad quality affect abandonment rates? So we have a bunch of data. I think the challenge for all of us is to take that in. You asked how would we wish we could use it. I think that the goal is to take all the data that we have, combine it in a way that makes sense, and then be able to derive insights from it. and I wouldn't say it's enough to say like, hey, the video quality is great, but we have to know why it was great. Or we know that viewers abandon viewing because of quality challenges, but what is the threshold for that abandonment? So I think that's really how we wish we could use the data to get more and more insights into what's going on.
That makes sense. So Perry, you talked a little bit about having a little bit of a different context in developing apps and experiences for people and collecting data to help inform that process. Mm-hmm. So can you explain that a little bit more? What kind of data you're collecting and how is it informing your app development process?
Sure thing. So we're really focused on the full end-to-end experience. And in the old days, if you wanted to tweak anything, let's say you had some data, right? Launch your service, you go to market. Best practice for any startup or new streaming services, collect market feedback and iterate. But you couldn't do that in real time, so we had a lot of pain. Our customers had a lot of pain. You would recompile code, you would resubmit to manufacturer for certification, push an update to your customers. Now the market's matured to the point, and our strategies have matured to the point where we can decouple the experience from the app itself. And by doing that, the app makes a call, and real time, we can dynamically modify the user experience. So what we want to do then is, along with the video, the video is buffering, we can swap out players or move to a faster CDN. And so we can do things like that around the video, but also the entire experience. So we'll monitor what's going on, and we can do A/B testing, and that's the type of data that we collect that we act on. So if a certain segment on a multivariate test is doing better than the other, then we can make decisions and provide a different experience to certain segments.
And you're doing that in real time. You're doing that in live app deployment mode.
It's actually upon opening the app. So we're going to take consumer behaviors. So it's not necessarily live within the app, but when the person taps into it, we know their behaviors.
Sort of reconfigures for them.
What works for them. Right?
Got it. Awesome. Great. Well, John, you mentioned you're collecting obviously a lot of experience data. You have the consumer perspective around video. So can you drill in a little bit what specific consumer or experience data you're collecting and how is that informing or improving the consumer experience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we look at it a few different ways. And for me, some of it splits into our overall product development and product management process and our general operations process. On more of the product side, we really look at engagement and what users are doing directly with our product, what parts of the product they're engaging with, doing things like A/B testing, and trying to really tap into what's providing the most value within our product to those users so that we can change the product over time, whether it's as part of the development process or doing things that adapt dynamically based on usage and engagement. And that can be just looking at what people click on or how long they're using parts of the product for, how long they're watching video for. There's always a bit of a challenge for us trying to measure that across different content types. When we're looking at TV shows, the popularity of one show or one episode to the next can vary. So we try to figure out how to equalize that so we can understand what's really going on with the product experience as opposed to the content, and that can be a challenge. On the operations side, it maybe is a little bit more, sometimes a little bit clearer. Like we have more well-defined metrics that we use just to make sure that the health of the video experience is functioning properly. So we look at things like rebuffering and average bit rate. We look at the number of concurrent users at any given time. And and a lot of what's really critical for us in being able to manage that efficiently is the presentation of it. So we'll look at things like the number of concurrent users, and we'll watch it in real time. And if there's a huge drop that happens at any given point, that'll be a trigger for us. And we actually have alerts and things that are that are baked into those triggers so that we'll be able to then go in and say, okay, something really significant changed with the quality of the experience. Now let's try and figure out what happened so we can go and fix it.
Got it. Thanks.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Oh, sure, please.
Like, how do you account for differences in like different devices or different locations for your customers? Because if you think about it, I think the gold standard that everybody talks about is the TV-like experience, right? The goal you even referenced in your initial story, right? Like people expect, like when you turn it on, it's going to work, it's going to play beautifully, it's not going to be fuzzy. But Do you see differences between like somebody on a 3G mobile phone for one particular, network or DMA for CBS All Access versus another, and like home versus out in the world? I'm wondering if you have different levels for that.
We definitely do, and we cut it in a bunch of different ways so that we can try to see those things. It's, it's difficult to know if like one or, if a small segment of the population is having an quality impacted experience,
Right.
how to identify that and pull that out of the overall. But generally, we'll look at the different device platforms,
right.
and we'll keep an eye on those differently. We'll look at live video separately from on-demand video. We look at geographic regions. So if we see, a small change in one area, we'll try to map out differences across geography to see if it's one particular region that's having a problem. Right. We look at network providers as well.
So Darren, teeing off of that,
Yeah.
So you gave a great overview of all the different contexts and ways, and sort of your end-to-end solution that you can use data. But
Right.
when you put on your customer's hat, in terms of how do you think your customers want you to use data? What do you think are the top 2 or 3 requests they have as to how VDMS could better use data?
Well, I think that answer evolves as the industry evolves, right? If you asked me that question 2 or 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I think we were in a state where like the question was like, can we achieve a TV-like experience? Can we actually stream to these devices when we have, a wide array of different operating systems, different video codecs, different DRM that we have to implement based on, your ultimate display device? And I think in that context, the questions that we want to hear are the things that John described, like what's the rebuffering rate? What's the average bit rate? What's the stream startup time? Like all these things that quantify and give you hard metrics against the gold standard of television. I'd say that's becoming table stakes. I think it's been proven through some of the largest live events that we've streamed ourselves and others, through widespread distributors like Netflix and others. I think that kind of quality of streaming question is definitely still there and definitely important. But I think the questions our customers are trying to ask us evolve into things like removing the implications of quality or streaming or picture quality from the experience. What other insights can you provide us to show that I should invest more in a particular kind of content versus another? Like there's a lot of choices for content. Content costs are, I would say, probably one of the biggest cost factors in your equation. So they want to know, is this live event and live streaming really the way to attract more viewers to my service? Should I do more live events or should I do more on-demand events? So being able to provide those kind of insights about, it's really about correlation. It's correlation of the content types with content quality with consumers themselves. So
Got it. Great. Anything spark questions out there? Anybody have any questions for the panel? Or I'm just going to keep asking. Okay. All right. So let's pivot a little bit and think of the standardization and the ecosystem in general. So obviously one of the many complexities of delivering internet video or video over the internet isn't just the complexities of the internet infrastructure and all its inherent frailties and robustness, but also the fact that we all have different devices with different screen resolutions, with different capabilities, running different operating systems. And in the world of linear TV, we had one standard that evolved decade over decade, the better. But so when you think about standardization efforts and shared data and driving to more of an efficient, what are your thoughts there? You think also like the efforts at the SVA for standardizing metrics coming out of the player. So maybe John, I'll let you start with an answer on this particular. Any particular thoughts or insights?
Yeah, I think standardization generally is usually good. I guess it depends what the standards are. There is a general challenge for us that probably a lot of you guys also share, which is we have so many partners in the video workflow in particular, but also in just our overall ecosystem for providing these experiences to consumers. And it is sometimes hard to then communicate what the quality of experience is in a way that all of our partners can understand it. I think it's pretty typical that we'll say, hey, we're seeing this issue, and someone will say, we're not seeing that. So figuring out how we can actually standardize what the experience is and trying to get a consistent level of understanding. Generally pretty helpful. I think the other thing that goes along with that is when we do find problems that pop up in the workflow, actually being able to identify really quickly where that problem is and not just being able to say, hey, we're seeing a problem with the overall experience, but figuring out quickly why that problem is occurring, as opposed to then just knowing we have a problem and then starting to look at do some sort of investigation, sort of work backwards. So we've invested a lot of effort there to try and understand what's happening with each of the components of the workflow along the way.
Got it. Perry, do you have a point of view in terms of the apps you guys build, in terms of standardization of the metrics coming off those apps that can be used across the ecosystem?
It's not, I would say it's more a function of the different technology verticals for all these devices, so there's a lot of fragmentation. So our focus as app development is really more about that and how we can not have to recreate the wheel every time we develop for different types of platforms. So repurpose, reuse, and standardize our approach to certain technology verticals as we develop these apps. And also, as far as experience goes, make sure that our customers are not just simply developing an experience for the lowest common denominator. So low power devices, for example, can't do a lot of fancy stuff. So then, consumers end up with a very base experience because the lowest common denominator didn't have the firepower to. So that when we talk about standardization from an app development perspective, it's really more along those lines.
Got it. Aaron, thoughts?
The standards conversation is always fraught with tension because there's always two different sides, right? I would say from a content owner consumer perspective, the need for standardization is strong. Like John can drive down his costs if he only has to encode one video one time for every single platform. On the other side, you have device manufacturers and systems integrators, service providers who see a lack of standardization as an opportunity for differentiation. I will have a different video codec on the iPhone because I know HLS is going to look better than HDS or Smooth, to take us back a couple years, right? So I'd say overall, the standards bodies like the SVA are doing good work for being the voice for the content providers and service providers. I think there's no question that standardization of key industry metrics like ratings, things that drive business value are super important. Ultimately, I think the market conditions will decide the standardization stuff. We're already starting to see standardization around a single video codec with MPEG Dash. We're getting through some final stages of kind of DRM challenges with Dash and HLS having some conversations about common encryption formats. So I think it gets there. I think everybody sees the value in the efficiency of a single standard way of doing things. Certainly I would say from a reporting analytics perspective, like having to only collect data from a single format makes it easier for something like Conviva to provide a unified kind of view of the world and how video plays. But as a service provider, I think we've made a little bit of hay taking advantage of kind of the disorganization amongst folks. So I think you'll see it kind of remain unstandardized for a little while, but I think eventually it'll get there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, because in the end, it all gets driven by our desire to watch on any screen we happen to want to buy, right? And it used to be when you picked a brand of television, it all the same interface for connecting, and now we're all, probably everybody in this room has 2 or 3 screens on them personally right now, and you count across your home, and we have to standardize and figure out a way to deliver across all of them, which in itself is somewhat of an oxymoron from standardization. But I mean, related to this also is obviously. What's different between traditional linear TV and digital or internet is we can measure everything, and you could arguably even measure too much, which then sort of pivots to the notion of either privacy or proprietary data. And when you think about standardization or sharing of data so you can provide a better quality of experience, you run right into, well, that's my data, I don't want you sharing it, right? So you guys have thoughts or feelings on sort of privacy or sharing of data and what data is okay to share and what data is not as it relates to quality of experience and getting a better internet video viewing environment out there?
From our perspective, looking at consumer behaviors and understanding what they're doing outside of the in-app experience. Again, I come from a very app-oriented world, and we don't necessarily know what their behaviors are outside of that app, right? So it'd be nice if within certain platforms if content providers could share consumer behavior across app. And I know it's unrealistic, but that would be wonderful.
So how do you think that could happen? What would make that happen?
I think the platform itself could maybe create an initiative whereby they figure that everyone can gain from that, right? Again, I think it's really pie in the sky, but I would think that we would have to start there.
John, thoughts? I mean, you guys own the consumer, right? They connect to you, log in with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that it's definitely delicate from a legal consumer protection privacy standpoint. And it's obviously something that we take really seriously. But there's a balance of how do we make sure that we're using that information to actually deliver on what our promise is to those users, especially users that are subscribing directly and paying us money each month. So it's really critical that we have that information, and in some cases, really critical that we provide that information onto our ecosystem partners to make sure that we're doing our job. And I think consumers really expect and demand that. But we also have that responsibility that we have to balance. I think we try to be pretty cautious about what we're collecting, and even more so how we're sharing it, and generally involve our lawyers whenever we're not sure.
Got it. And Darren, obviously Verizon with AOL had to go through.
Yeah, Verizon AOL is a big believer in data. The shared data across the ecosystem is essential for the business models moving forward. There's no doubt about that. I think from a consumer protection perspective, I think we're getting the right safeguards in place to allow people to opt in to sharing their data. But it has a huge impact on consumer experience, the experience itself, and I would say the revenue for our customers. I'll give you a few examples. So we had a large sports broadcaster migrate to our platform in the last 24 months. They switched over the way their ads were displayed. So it went from a client-side model where you kind of switch ads and there's a little bit of rebuffering as a new player loads to what we call a server-side model. So it's more of a TV-like experience where they go straight from the content of the show into an ad. There's no break. It's a seamless play out. The quality doesn't have to, the heuristics of the ABR doesn't have to readjust between the content and the commercial. And they immediately saw, so just that simple switch of making an ad view more TV-like instead of more internet-like increased their ad retention and ad viewability by 50%. Wow. So quality has a huge impact on that revenue and on that data. So now imagine with that same technology where you can not only provide a great experience, but then use some of the data that you can pull in from our platform across all the different touch points, tapping into a larger ad tech provider like an AOL who has very extensive data management platforms for ads, and then providing targeted, personalized ads that are relevant to the consumer or relevant to the, to the content, I think has a huge impact. So the more data, I think, will ultimately lead to greater viewer satisfaction and will even fight off some of the things that we see happening today, like users choosing to load ad blockers on their phone because they're just not happy with the quality of the experience of the ads. So
got it. Right. So just looking to see if anybody has questions. Yes, we have a question out there, please.
Yeah, this is for John. You mentioned you're looking at a lot of data when you characterize your workflow or there's problems. Have you been able to put any self-healing types of things in so you can automatically fix problems without anybody having to look at it?
So I'm supposed to repeat the question.
Yeah, go
real
ahead.
quick. So the question was to John about a lot of data and using data to improve quality of experience in the network performance. Have they looked at any sort of automated or self-healing where the data is sort of analyzed, ingested, and quality improvements are made automatically?
Yeah, I think there are certain pieces where we'll specifically with networking. I know when we'll find concerns with how content's being delivered over the network, and then things will adjust dynamically to account for that. I think we also look at our API layer as really a critical component for that, and I know we have some software in place that helps adjust when there are pieces that aren't working. But I think for the most part, that's something that we continue to evolve and try to figure out as we see the patterns of where we run into those kinds of problems, putting things into place to have more automated solutions, not have to manually fix those along the way.
Great. So pivoting to sort of next, Aaron, you sort of set this up a little bit when you started talking about AVOD and SVOD. So let's talk about business models and quality of experience data related to business models. Do we think experience data is more or less valuable in an AVOD versus SVOD world?
When it comes to SVOD specifically, conversion is paramount, right? So we identify different flows to the content and A/B test, measure which one's more effective, which entry point. When it comes to the price, what font, what position, all these little things make a difference. If you saw Jeff Tapper's keynote this morning, that's paramount, I think, to the success and optimization of any service. So, when it comes to certain models like SVOD, taking data through A/B testing to identify the best flow that's going to optimize conversion for a subscription service is really important. And I like Darren's example of AVOD and the quality of experience of just the ad alone in and of itself can make a difference in engagement and retention. So,
Yeah, I think
CBS?
it's hard to say which is more valuable because I think they're both really valuable, but there are some differences in how we manage it. I think with purely free ad-supported business, in some ways, the scale is really critical, and those subtle differences in the experience can have a really profound change. And it's really critical to look at things like rebuffering. That all of a sudden, if you have an issue, people can your users can be gone, and they may not think to come back. On the flip side, when you have paying subscribers like we do for our CBS All Access service, they're actually turning over their hard-earned cash to you every month. And so then it's really critical to look at the individual user experience. And when someone calls into our customer service team, for example, and has an issue, we've built in ways that they can actually track what that user's viewing history and experience was, and try to see if they had a problem with their connection, or if the video rebuffered continually during a session, or those kinds of things, so they can try to help a user resolve those things, or actually report back to us if there was something that was going on with that particular user.
Got it. What about live and on demand? Is there any differences the way we should be thinking about data and experience in live versus on demand?
Live events, the big question is always latency of the stream, right? How far behind live is it? And that has an impact on viewers' perceptions of quality. So absolutely essential. And I think across live on demand, across SVOD, AVOD, quality is paramount for really any consumer. If you look at the leading indicators for SVOD, for particular, the leading indicators for consumer churn is a reduction in viewing time. The more people watch an SVOD service, the less likely they are to churn to another thing, right? So quality is one of the main drivers of why people watch something less. Verizon Digital Media Services ran a consumer survey earlier this year. We polled 1,000 consumers across the US who are active SVOD, AVOD users. And across the board, we saw that the people we surveyed reported a 4x reduction in average viewing time per day if they experienced more than one buffering event in the services they used. So buffering alone has a huge impact on total viewing duration during a day. And if that's one of the largest drivers of SVOD churn, if people just aren't using a service, so they're going to switch it off and move to something else, that's just as impactful as the relevance of an ad or how well an ad looks for all sorts of content.
Yeah, that's interesting. We measure that as well year on year with our observed data. And what's interesting, maybe not surprising, but interesting, is that our tolerance for buffering and how quickly we'll leave is decreasing. So we have higher expectations as consumers each year, according to our data, and our threshold and our expectations of how well the internet should be performing is getting higher and higher every year. And that's you would think maybe you'd get more compassionate toward it, but we're actually getting a little more hardcore in our expectations.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how finicky people are, and I mean myself included. I'm probably as bad as anyone, getting really impatient when there's an issue. But I think we compare ourselves to that, like what we consider the gold standard to the broadcast TV experience. But it wasn't all that long ago. I feel like you'd experience issues with your cable going out, or your TV experience would have problems as well. And I think with over-the-top internet delivery, there's even less tolerance for those kinds of things. Even though people just expect their TV to work, on our services, I think there's people just if it doesn't and it's momentary, they're on to the next thing.
Yeah. What about the obviously special case of hugely popular live events on sort of peak concurrent viewers and the implications that has to your service and the way you're collecting and processing data? Any thoughts?
It's always a challenging process, managing very large scale live events. But I think largely the process is actually pretty similar. We treat things similarly. You definitely have less time to address any issues as they pop up. So it's really critical to have that information. But you could argue it's the same with on-demand content. If you have a problem, you still need to fix it really quickly because of that limited tolerance that people have to sit through quality impacted experiences. But I think it's just a little bit more dramatic and compounded when you have a really large live experience that you're working on.
Yeah, for us, for live events, data is an essential part of the planning process. So, we've done the Oscars a couple of years now, other large, live broadcasts. And we look at historical data for the service providers in previous years and kind of traffic patterns leading up to the event, and we plan capacity and we kind of route our network to achieve, or at least to plan for, 3x, 4x the number of expected viewers to ensure that, if there are any problems that we can, or, at least over-plan for capacity so live events, never go down. But I agree with John, like having, real-time data, there's nothing like a live event, the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl, clock ticking down, about to kick the field goal to win the game. Like if your service goes out right there, your viewers have zero tolerance and will not wait for you to resolve that problem. So you have to have that data there. You have to have all the different parts of the ecosystem at your beck and call at that moment to figure out where the problem is. Is it with your CDN? Is it with your authentication service? Is it your app service? All those things like rely on data from quality to make informed decisions and to troubleshoot problems when they occur. So,
yeah, quick panel poll, real time. What's each of your definitions of real time? In time duration. What does real time mean in your business?
Under a second, right?
Yeah, it's got to be close to live, under a second.
Under a second? Same?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Any other questions related to this stuff? Yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question for John. Given the demographic of CBS, how much more mission critical does that make your job? I mean, would another network, cable or broadcast, would require less feedback, less intuition with the audience? I guess the question is, does the CBS audience and the fact that it's so over-skewing compared to other programming outlets, does that sort of change the nature of your job, make it more important?
So just to repeat the question is, because of CBS's audience demographic or audience expectations based on their content and their brand, are they more demanding for these level of performance and reporting?
Does the older demographic have problems, I guess, streaming video compared to?
Okay, and older demographic.
Yeah, that's a fair question. Honestly, I don't think so. I mean, I think the expectation is pretty consistent across the board. I think there are things that we look at in things like overall product design and making sure that our products are intuitive and people can find what they're looking for easily. When it comes to the actual experience of serving and delivering a video specifically, I think the expectations are pretty consistent across the board. I don't know, maybe my kids are less patient than I am, but I'm pretty impatient as well, so I don't know.
Yeah. Was there another question I saw? Yes.
Yeah, and this is probably more for Perry and Darren, but the rise of virtual MVPDs and obviously much more live viewing happening. How is that strain going to affect what you guys are doing? And then also the consumer experience as 4 or 5 of these launching months next year.
So the question was with the rise of new MPVDs, what are the implications on your business models or your businesses with multiple of them launching at the same time?
It's a great thing for everybody, I think, for consumers, for service providers, for content owners. Multiple services are great. From a capacity perspective, I think, and from a data collection, from a reporting perspective, I think we're all ready for those services to launch. I don't think, multiple live TV services, from my perspective, is only a good thing. I don't think we worry about things like network capacity or quality decreasing because there's a Hulu Live and a PlayStation and Sling TV all happening at the same time. I think that the things that cause problems, challenges with quality are not multiple service providers. They are larger live events that have, tens of millions of concurrent viewers at the same time, all starting at the same time, right? So you think about the Super Bowl or, a kickoff. It's not the fact that there's 10 million viewers at one time that's the problem. It's that you go from 10 million viewers at 5 p.m., or you go from 0 viewers at 5 p.m. to 10 million viewers at 5:01 p.m. And that ability to scale very quickly to achieve kind of the large audience is really what today is causing challenges with quality.
Yes.
Get a microphone. That's great. How much do you guys use social media to either verify or act as a multiplier if you start to see things go wrong? That's usually a very quick indicator to see if there's a problem in your tooling, versus if it's actually out in the public, and how do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do. Although, I think we try not to rely on that as our leading indicator of any issues or problems going on. We definitely get a response whether people like something or not. I mean, we get feedback on everything. I think in a few years back, we would see more of like a Twitter flood when there was a problem, and that would be the first way we would find out about it. Say that rarely, if ever, happens now, but it does help verify when something's going on and we see it. It just sort of backs it up. I would say we do use that in some cases to try to find more specific, smaller issues that impact a smaller group of people. We'll see something that pops up on Twitter and we'll try to understand why someone's having that experience when it was something that we didn't see widespread throughout the data that we're collecting. And that's actually been useful. Like, we found a couple problems that we've identified from finding just a few people out there who've reported consistent things.
Yeah, from a service provider perspective, if you're using Twitter as your QoE tool, you are doing it wrong. Like, you should have solved those problems, identified the network congestion, whatever the problem was, should have been addressed, or at least mitigated in some way before it hit social media, I would think.
And what we're doing as a development partner is, after launching these apps, we don't, say call it a day. We have a stand-up quality assurance service that does QBot or automated testing, hundreds of test cases daily, so that maybe we can get in front of those problems before they get to social media, because it does have an impact. I mean, social media can be brutal, and I think it puts a little bit more pressure on the service provider to be more diligent in the quality of experience overall.
Yeah. I'll also add, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was in a group with a bunch of media industry folks who are all working on internet video, and someone asked, how do you know if there's a problem with your service? And the majority of people in the group answered Twitter, and it was pretty shocking at the time. I think the tide has probably turned on that, but it was not that long ago that a lot of people were relying on that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Just one comment. I'll pitch in as well, since we have a lot of publisher customers, and a fair number of them actually ask us to integrate our data feed with Twitter and intersect it. And if nothing else, geolocate, high volumes of tweets in certain areas to some of the experience metrics we have that have geolocation information on it. Just correlate it in real time. It's just another signal. It's not the primary signal, but it's a signal, and it also helps them potentially know should they be responding, right? Should they be putting a statement out or just ignoring it? Right? There was another question, I think I saw a hand. No? Okay. So pivoting again, and this is probably more to Perry. So you talked a lot about using data to help user experience, not necessarily just video viewing experience, but the user's experience of the whole application, and specifically around sort of personalization. Can you maybe drill into a use case, a particular instance of how you guys use that data, how you can use what you're collecting in that flow to make the app experience even better the next time they bring up the app?
Sure. So there's two areas I would say. There's a huge market inefficiency in getting the right content to bubble up at the right time for the right person. And that's really kind of the holy grail. So we talk about discovery engines and all that. So taking consumer behaviors, creating algorithms, making sure that the right content bubbles up at the right time. That's one thing. But the one area where we're doing a lot of research on in UX is demographic. And digital natives, those that were born after 1995, have their brains wired differently. I mean, they don't know anything but digital. And then you have digital newcomers. There's two variants of that. One is born after 1980 or before 1980. And we could take data to identify which demographic the consumer falls into, right? Now, the question about CBS and an older demo, as such, I'm sure, it's going to be a fairly simple, UI, and simple is better, by the way, for most of us. But again, there's certain services that might want to, cater to the digital native, and they can't, because they have to kind of create an experience that caters to the lowest common denominator, so to speak, right? So taking data, creating different types of user experiences, and serving those based on the demographic profile of the person logging in, which is kind of, I think, advanced and risky. And I don't think we're quite there yet as a consumer base, but I think we're moving in that direction. There's no reason why we can't ultimately have completely different experiences based on our demographic and the way that we navigate through content, which is very different from those different segments that I mentioned.
Yeah. And what about CBS, John? Is CBS, obviously experience data, you can correlate with engagement data. And when you have, it's a good experience and it's highly engaged, you can also then correlate that to the content, right? And then start to make inferences around this type of content seems to be performing better.
Sure.
For these. Do you guys do that right
Yeah,
now?
definitely. Okay. And it changes for us seasonally and depending on what we have going on through the calendar. As far as the experience itself, I think one good example that we focus on a lot is what happens when you finish one video and go to the next. It works really well when you don't even notice it. I think, when you're binge watching and going from one episode to the next and you don't even get time to go to the bathroom and you're just so engaged in the show that you go from one to the next and the actual user interface of the product just completely gets out of the way, and it's just about knowing what the user wants next and feeding it right directly to them. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that, especially when we have a lot of people watching current shows where it's not as conducive to binge watching because we have things that are just airing. The newest episode is this week and people are keeping up, but trying to understand what are people going to want to do after that episode ends, and looking at their behavior, trying to give the next logical thing for them.
Yep. And then Darren, obviously you guys don't own content, but you do have a unique position in that you own the whole end-to-end experience, from sort of capture and encoding to the actual player. What's your notion of personalization with that sort of view of the whole delivery chain?
It really depends on our customers. We have some unique capabilities in the platform that we think our customers are starting to exploit. So if you think about our ability to basically rewrite the playout manifest, our system in real time is telling the player which chunks to download, and that gives us the ability to do things like targeted advertising. We have this unique session management where for each time somebody presses play, they get a direct connection to our server, and there's this two-way communication, telling our system what they're watching, and then allowing our system to respond. So having that kind of unique session with each viewer enables a lot of cool technological things that that we're going to do. Some of the things we have are, if you think about some of our broadcast customers who have, a fairly rigid playout schedule. I think in the future you'll start to see the playout schedule become a little more malleable, where you can combine live assets, on-demand assets to assemble, in some ways, a personalized linear channel for a viewer. So in John's case, the personal linear channel is the result of one video auto playing from the next, but we see a future in which when somebody logs into their app based on their viewing history, we could have an entire schedule of episodes mapped out for them for the next 6 hours if they wanted to. So our ability to kind of track in real time what each viewer watches, to store it in things like recommendation systems, allows for kind of additional use cases for personalization and discovery. And I think we'll start to see that really unfold as kind of the next evolution of OTT in the coming years.
Got it. So another question, so sort of, I'll start up with a funny anecdote. So I'm a marketing guy, and I'm not a super young marketing guy, and but I work in Silicon Valley with a lot of super young engineers, right? And just talking about internet natives, and sort of the metaphor of data and how you use data. One time, this young engineering head said to me, "Well, I'm Google and you're Apple, right? And we're never going to get along because Apple makes qualitative decisions about what a consumer wants, what's a well-designed device, not so much." And Google is all quantitative. It's just use data, pure data, to make all decisions. It's like you were saying, Perry, about A/B testing, and just let the test tell you what to do, right? And so when you think about data and experience, there's the old world, which was sort of the world of Nielsen, where it was panel-based. You ask questions, you do surveys, and you find out. And then there's the new world of the internet natives. It's 100% data-driven, machine learning. Amazon knows what you're going to buy next before you're going to. Where do you guys think the world's going to pan out there? Are we just going to move all data-driven? Will it be a hybrid? What are your thoughts? Wax prophetic.
Data-driven. I mean, I think that's the way you optimize. And we talk about artificial intelligence or machine learning and self-healing, whatever it takes to optimize the experience real time. And so I think that provides the best user experience, right? I think that's the way things are definitely headed.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. I mean, for us, it's really about understanding our customers and understanding how they're interacting with our products, and looking at data and looking at things like A/B testing can be extremely useful, and in breaking some of the things that we think we know about what our users want and how they use our products. At the same time, there are also always those risks of relying too much on data and making sure that we have like a clear direction for where we're moving with our services and with our products, and then using that data to help supplement how we're making those decisions and how we're evolving our products.
That's a great point, because you could be too reactive if you're just data-driven.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think one of the biggest factors we'll probably see is the kind of content that we're talking about. I think certain types of content, maybe shorter form content, will lend itself well to more data-driven approaches, but people will always still look for that voice in the wilderness to tell them what's cool, what's great, what needs to be watched. So I think it'll be a mix.
Yeah, Maxim, I always think is, you can use data to amplify virality, but you can't use data to create virality, right? And there's always going to be that creative spark that's just not going to come from data, and that's where, good content is king, and good creative ideas often, they can be informed by data, but they're generally not 100% data-driven, right? So any other questions in the audience? We're getting close to the end here. Yes?
I wanted to focus on how each of you use customer service data to improve quality of experience in your products or services.
So the question is how everybody uses customer service data to improve your processes and experience.
Yeah, I mean, customer service data might mean different things to you
Right.
guys, but it's interesting is having worked on CBS's digital entertainment products for a number of years before we actually launched a subscription service. we didn't have a lot of direct customer service. We used things like social media, emails coming in from users, but we didn't have a lot of direct contact with those users, and that was a bit more challenging. We launched our direct-to-consumer subscription service 2 years ago, and since then, having the benefit of a customer service team is incredibly valuable. I talk to those guys on an almost daily basis, probably a daily basis, and we work with them to try to sum up some of the big trends that we're hearing from customers, but also we'll just try to dig into some really specific use cases. So I think the challenge, like other parts of the experience, is trying to digest all of that data and figure out how we standardize it and how we can actually make it actionable and learn from it. But we spend a lot of time chewing through it with them and just really trying to understand what our users are calling up and emailing about and either complaining about or having problems with, or hopefully giving us positive feedback on occasion. Other
answers? Any thoughts?
I just find it interesting how all these traditional media companies are getting into the direct-to-consumer business, and how it's a complete paradigm shift for them. So it's a big challenge. As John said, they're just now really touching the consumer directly for the first time, and so these companies have transformed themselves into user experience organizations, and that goes all the way from marketing to customer service and everything in between. We deal with everything in between and try to help them through that, but I think from an organizational perspective, it's a complete shift, and it's uncharted territory, really.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, I see it within our organization as well. The company's just really not, we're traditionally, as a broadcaster, always gone through, either over the air where you're so far from those customers, or going through a distributor like a cable and satellite company, where if customers have a problem, they're going back and calling their cable company. And it really is a big shift, and it's a real change in the DNA of the company.
Yeah, I think that's best typified when you think about the way traditional media companies thought of their customers and the way they sold their customers. It was an audience, and the audience was usually done by demographics, not by. Now, when you have subscribers and they're paying you money, now they become people, and you need to serve them as people now. They're not just an audience. Yeah. Yes.
Just a quick follow-up on the customer support side of things. So my background previously was at Amazon in the customer support side of things, where they famously had Jeff B escalations, where you can email Jeff Bezos, and he'll very quickly pass that on down the ranks for a 24-hour turnaround with kind of a systemic overview of the problem, a long-term resolution, et cetera. Now on the product management side of things, I'm curious just to hear your feedback on how the panel would gauge, particularly around live streaming products, one customer contact that may come through, and when you don't have the data or you're not sure exactly what the impact could be, if it's the tip of the iceberg or if it's an individual contact. So it's something that we see pretty typically with live games or new ad insertion programs that are launching, where we want to be very aware of what's happening in the wild, but it's not always very easy to pair data with customer contacts. And I just wanted to see if you could help me understand kind of how the panel would approach that.
From my perspective, from the service provider perspective, I see two parallel paths between data points that come in from a single consumer versus data points that come in from us as the service provider, right? So we operate two 24/7 network operations centers. We have guys looking at glass 365 days a year, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, one soon to be in Europe. And our job is to proactively give data points to our customers to say, either, hey, there's something happening, you should be aware of this, or, hey, something happened and we already fixed it. So our job as a service provider is to say, here are the data points that you should be aware of. And then our customers, like John, can step in and weigh that against a single request or a group of requests that are coming in.
Yeah, I would say specifically with large-scale live events, if we're responding to individual issues from social media or through our customer service channel, probably means things are going pretty well. And it's back to that notion of real-time data. If things are really messed up, we know super quickly, and we won't have time to address the individual issues that are coming through. We'll have to fix whatever that big problem is.
Great. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, I think we're right on time for the end here. So I want to thank the panel so much and the audience. Appreciate everyone's time. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.